Hello, everyone. My name is Katerina Dunavi, and I welcome you to this talk. We'll just wait for a few seconds for people to join from Pat Fryman's talk. So for those of you joining later, welcome to our 5th Center for Behavior Analysis conference, and the first that we are holding online. I can see people joining in, which is great. So in the meantime, I am delighted to introduce to you Dr. Matthew Brodhead, who is an associate professor at Michigan State University. His research examines focused social skill interventions for children with autism. He also writes about conceptual issues relating to the ethical and professional behavior of practicing behavior analysts, really important topics. He currently serves as an associate editor for the Journal of Behavioral Education, Behavior Analysis in Practice, and the Journal of Developmental and Physical Disabilities. Dr. Brodhead also serves as the director of First Steps, an in-home early intervention program that provides focused behavioral interventions to children on a wait list to receive comprehensive behavioral services. We are delighted to have him with us today, and I'm grateful for you accepting my invitation. At the end of his presentation, we will have time for questions, and if you have any questions in the meantime, please type them in the questions box at the bottom of your screen. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dunavi, for having me, and for the introduction, and for everybody for having me here. I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but it's so great that we can meet in the comfort of our offices, homes, cars, wherever we may be, over this great platform, Behavior Live, to be able to connect. And then also, I know that following Dr. Fryman is a tough act, but I hope he wore his sunglasses in this talk. And if he didn't, shame on Pat for selling you short on that. But I don't have cool sunglasses, but I do have a topic that I believe is important, and I'm excited to share with you about the behavioral systems approach to ethics training and supervision. And as a bit of background, before I get started, I just do want to note that I'm at Michigan State University, and we have a master's and PhD program in special education and applied behavior analysis. So if anyone's ever interested, maybe flying over the pond and you want to come get a graduate degree over here, you're more than welcome to contact me, learn more information. And Michigan is a very beautiful place, and as evidenced by this picture all the way on the right here of the Red Cedar River, which goes all the way through campus, and you see the beautiful fall colors. It looks like that for about like a week, and then it's gray for 4 or 5 months. I'm not doing a very good job selling this, am I? I also do want to note that we have, if you're interested in ethics, a few textbooks that are available. We just published the 2nd edition of Practical Ethics for Effective Treatment of ASD. And I also have a workbook on behavioral systems analysis and ethical behavior that I've self-published. And for those of you who teach, or maybe at a research or teaching institution, we also just published an edited text titled Research Ethics and Behavior Analysis from Laboratory to Clinic and Classroom. So we've got in there a whole range of chapters on ethics, all the way from coming up with your research idea to disseminating it. And so I would be remiss not to disclose that I do receive financial compensation for the sale of the textbooks. It's not that much though, unfortunately, but maybe if we sell enough copies, I'll be able to fly over across the pond and say hi at some time. So what I want to do today is introduce ethics, behavioral systems, and behavioral systems analysis, BSA. And then I'm going to provide you with just kind of like a basic example of that. And if I have time, I'm going to maybe discuss some additional benefits of standardizing the way that we practice, again, if time permits. And when I go through my talk today, I want you to kind of think about how you might be able to apply this analytical process that I'm about to share with you in the setting that you practice or work. And so I know that you all work in very different places, and no two settings are identical, and everyone's situation is unique. And so I don't want you to get caught up on the minor details, but instead think about this in terms of the big picture. Think about this in terms of the analytical process that I'm trying to describe, that you can then take and apply to the place that you work, because you are the expert on the needs of your organization, your place of employment. And really, it's not my job to tell you how to act in those situations. You know much more about that than I do. Instead, I see my role as one of facilitating or providing you with ideas or processes to be able to do the things that you need to do to be a better leader. So we'll begin with ethics, behavioral systems, and behavioral systems analysis. First, important to contextualize and define the subject matter here. Ethics can be defined as the omission of behavior in compliance or coordination with the verbally stated rules and behavior analytic cultural practices guiding practitioner behavior that are espoused by the BACB code. And so really what we mean by that, when we think about it practically as behavior analysts, we engage in ethical behavior when we engage in behavior that aligns with what's written in the BACB code. So sometimes that's very simple things like being nice to other people, taking data, being truthful. And then there might be some other more complex things that mold into that as well. But really our day-to-day activities as behavior analysts, should all fall under the umbrella of the BACB code or whatever ethics codes that you might be beholden to. Now, obviously, I hope, right, that we all know that ethical behavior is important, and many, if not all of us, provide services or oversight of services, or maybe we're a student and we're working towards that goal. But whatever that may be, sometimes our oversight of professional or ethical behavior might go by the wayside. And there's multiple reasons why that might be happen. One, there are not enough hours in the day to be able to get everything done that we need to do. And often those contingencies pull our behavior away to things that might be very pressing, or perhaps those are things that generate revenue for our organization. And we forget about ethics. And what's also kind of difficult, it's hard sometimes to think about how building systems involving ethical support would generate revenue for our organization. And I just want to be realistic, right? We all have to keep the lights on. And so despite what my children think, there's not a money tree growing outside, right? So we have to, be pragmatic about things. So, but despite all of that, we still can't ignore our obligation to promoting ethical behavior. Now, it's not really my style to be doom and gloom about things, but I do want to just briefly remind us what happens when we engage in unethical behavior. First, harm to the consumer, physical, emotional harm. Also, I would argue that providing ineffective treatment would be a form of harm because that's lost instructional time, or loss of the consumers either to our organization or maybe to other modes of treatment that could be harmful to them or less effective. Second, unethical behavior is not helpful for your organization, your school's reputation. For those of you who have been around for a while, you know that it is very difficult to build a strong reputation for what you do, but it is very easy to tarnish that. And you often hear stories about the one person or the one place that things aren't really, going very well over there. And that stuff just kind of passes around like wildfire. And so it is really important that, again, we work to maintain positive image, again, to promote, this wonderful science that we all work within. Now, I live and work in the United States, so where it's a litigious society, so engaging in unethical behavior could result in being sued. And obviously that's something that we would want to avoid. I don't recommend getting sued. Never been sued, but I don't recommend it to anybody, I'm sure. And then also, when we engage in unethical behavior, we don't help to perpetuate a strong or positive image about what applied behavior analysis is. We know this is a science that produces socially significant behavior change, but also admit that there have been things that have happened in the past that are unfortunate. And every time that something else happens that's unfortunate, it adds to that narrative of opposition. And so we have to be very mindful that we are under, like all professions are, under scrutiny, and we have to act in a way that we need to consider the long-term consequences of perhaps negative actions could be detrimental to a service funding mechanisms being pulled away or reduced because of negative perceptions about what applied behavior analysis is. Erroneous negative perceptions, rather. I firmly believe that most of us want to behave ethically. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go and develop a multiple relationship with this family so I can decrease the quality of care that I'm providing to their child. Just don't think that happens. Instead, I think there's difficulty in translating our ethics guidelines, whatever those ethics guidelines might be, into behaviors or processes that produce desired outcomes in our school or our clinic or our home or whatever setting that we're providing services. And in a lot of ways, and I'm guilty of this too, our training has failed us to make this conversion, where maybe we've relied heavily on teaching memorization of the BACB code, or maybe we work on case studies and ethics classes that they're interesting intellectual exercises, but they don't necessarily translate to practice. We don't focus enough on working to develop things that are situation specific to the settings, the operations, the conditions under which we provide behavior analytic services. So I believe that behavioral systems are a potential solution to these problems. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with behavioral systems, I want to welcome you to a world of enlightenment. For those of you who haven't or who are familiar, I hope that, at least presenting here something new or a different spin on this. But regardless, this has been something that has been very informative to me and has been very influential on my career. So in order to understand a behavioral system, we first must understand what a system is. So a system is an organized, integrated, unified set of components accomplishing a particular set of ultimate goals or objectives. So it is something that is very purposeful. It's not random or haphazard, right? It exists for a reason. Now, a behavioral system then is a system that involves human behavior. Simple. So it is a system that involves human behavior that is very purposeful. It exists for a reason, and it's focused to accomplish a goal or objective. And if you want to know more, I've got to tell you, check out the work of Heather McGee or Maria Malat. Both are absolutely fantastic scholars, excellent women, and I have been inspired much by their work. And so, again, Drs. McGee and Dr. Maria Malat. So let me show you some examples of behavioral systems that are actually quite common in behavior analytic service delivery. Discrete trial instruction, if you work in the area of autism treatment or in any sort of maybe instructional remediation programs or whatever it might be, discrete trial instruction is an example of a behavioral system. Remember, the definition of a system is an organized, integrated, unified set of components accomplishing a particular set of ultimate goals or objectives. So a goal of discrete trial instruction might be to systematically provide instructional opportunities. So how might we do that? We might standardize instructor behaviors, train instructors to provide feedback, observe instructor behavior over time to ensure high levels of treatment integrity. And there's certainly other things that we would do there as well. Just a couple examples. For those of you who have taught other people to do this, you know that when all of those things are operating well and they're falling into place, then the instructor is a lot more likely to provide high quality discrete trial instruction and be a lot more likely to meet that goal, to systematically provide instructional opportunities, which hopefully results in more robust learning. But when one or more of those components is not attended to, falls out of flavor, lack of a better way of putting it, isn't implemented as described, then we're going to be a lot less likely to meet that goal of providing systematically instructional opportunities, which is going to have detrimental effects on the learning outcomes, potentially. Functional analysis of challenging behavior is another example of a behavioral system. Again, remember the definition being an organized, integrated, unified set of components accomplishing a particular set of ultimate goals or objectives that involves human behavior. So a goal of functional analysis might be to analyze the environmental variables that might be responsible for the occurrence of problem behavior. So how might we do that? Again, a few steps, not all encompassing, but things that we may do: train employees to identify potential controlling variables, train them to develop and implement experimental conditions, observe implementation over time to ensure high levels of fidelity. When all of those and other components are coming together and working well, then we're going to be a lot more likely to figure out why behavior is happening and develop, hopefully, an appropriate function-based treatment and treat that challenging behavior. But if one or more of those components isn't attended to, isn't working to accomplish that ultimate goal or objective, we're going to be a lot less likely to do so. So those are just two examples of behavioral systems that are really quite common, I think, at least in the treatment delivery sense. You work in that area. We've done a really good job as behavior analysts with developing these systems that we can tweak for whatever our organizational or personal needs might be, that we can then implement. But we've described them very well. But the systems for engaging in ethical behavior, in our attention to developing the systems to engage in ethical behavior, it's much more scant. We have not done as good of a job as we have done in other places. Instead, we've said things that are very well intentioned, but they're awfully vague. And I'm guilty of this too. In fact, these are all things that I've said in the past, and I'm sure my students have looked at me and said, I have no idea what you mean by that, Matt. That's not very descriptive. Make good database decisions. Be a good collaborator. Identify the best function-based treatment. Act in the best interests of your clients. Those are all things that are very, very important, but they mean different things to different people in different circumstances. So you have these vague value statements. People go out, try to abide by them, and then they do something that is incongruent with whatever you had. And then we blame them. We engage in this pattern of victim blaming, where we say that the victim of the problem is the cause of the problem. But I remind everybody that the organism is always right. The person is always right. The learner is always right. They are engaging in behavior, failing to engage in behavior, or whatever else, engaging in behavior that is incongruent with whatever those expectations are, because we have not set up, as supervisors or as leaders, we have not set up the contingencies or the supports necessary to help them engage in the behavior that we do want to see. So the argument being that the organization, to a large degree, is responsible for that employee behavior, or whatever school or system that we work within, because that's the one that has a lot of control over what happens. The organization, you as the supervisors and the leaders, are responsible for those errors of omission or commission of our employees. So behavioral systems then, it helps the organization become empowered, where you as the leaders become empowered to make systems change to promote better ethical behavior, to help meet the needs of your clients, meet the needs of the organization, serve as an antecedent strategy to promote appropriate behavior, and as an antecedent strategy to prevent misconduct. My good friend Tyra Sellers always used to remind me that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's what this is all about. It's preventative. So next, I'm going to talk about the 6 steps of behavioral systems analysis, which is an analytical process that I believe provides a straightforward tool for helping to make changes to meet these goals and more within your organization. So here on the slide, I have the 6 steps of behavioral systems analysis, or BSA, and I'm going to briefly list them, and then I'm going to describe them in detail in the next few slides, and then I'm going to use them as context for the example. So this is going to be at front and center, really, of the presentation for the rest of our time together. And I also want to note there are multiple analytical models or processes for behavioral systems. Some have 4 steps, some have 5 steps. I just used the 6 steps because that was the one that I was trained on, and that's the one that I'm familiar with most. But all the good ones really kind of get at the same thing. So I'm, do what you like, do what works for you. Don't just do this because, do it if you like it, but it's not the only way. So the 6 steps being: analyze the natural contingencies, specify the performance objectives, design the system, implement the system, evaluate the system, and then revise until you reach your performance objectives. So the 6 steps of BSA. And if it's helpful at all, you could think about it in terms of the acronym ASDEAR. And it's pronounced as dear, a tool for systems change. And I'd like to introduce to you, this is my good friend, Ginny. Ginny, the ASDEAR. And Ginny was named through a contest after I did a presentation for the Virginia Association for Behavior Analysis in the United States, and named after the wonderful people of the great state of Virginia. So you might be wondering, why is this guy talking about deer? This is an ethics talk, but I want you to remember the acronym ASDEAR. Thank you. I see a smiley or crying emoji, laughing crying emoji in the chat, and I appreciate that. I can't see people's faces, but those reactions really, really mean a lot to me. Thank you. It's like the dad joke prevailed. I love it. And if you're a boxes and arrows kind of person, a linear thinker, if something like that even exists, I don't know. I'm just going to call myself that because I like boxes and arrows. It might be helpful to conceptualize the ASDEAR process in this way, where you begin at the top: analyze, specify, design, implement, evaluate, and then revise is like the continuous quality improvement component of behavioral systems analysis. You never get out of it, but that's a good thing. It's not like a reoccurring nightmare. This is like a good thing, right? We're committed to continuous quality improvement as behavior analysts. And so I'm just going to take this diagram, stick it over to the left here, so we can follow along with where we're at when I'm explaining the rest of this to you. So now I'm going to go into those 6 steps in a little bit more detail now and share some more about what they might mean in the context of this analytical process involving ethical behavior. So when we analyze the natural contingencies, this is where we identify potential behavioral excesses or deficits that are of concern. So what are the employees doing or not doing enough of, anyway, that are of concern? And with the emphasis on making sure that there's actually a negative effect on the environment. It's not just annoying to us, but it's actually causing or could cause a potential problem. There's nothing more precious than your time. It's your most valuable resource, and you want to make sure that you are spending your time working on things that matter. I work for a big organization. I was going to say, I don't know, I'm not going to share the name, but obvious where I work. And big organizations are small. There's a lot of waste. A lot of time is wasted. And so I'm all about being efficient. So I just want to make sure if we're going to do this, that we're actually doing it because there's a good reason to. But let's say that we've ensured that there's a need for change. Next, it's important to think about the potential targets for intervention and how they could fall under one or more standards or principles of the BACB code. So let me give you an example of that. So let's say that we have an employee who is indicating that they are conducting behavioral programs, and they're filling out the notes, they're filling out the data sheets, when in fact none of that is happening. Okay, that's bad news. So the issues there, potentially core principle 3, and looking at the introduction of the BACB code, standard 1.01, being truthful, and there might be others as well, certainly. So that just helps us to identify, okay, what ethical standards or principles are of value or are in play. And this is also helpful, I think, for new students or supervisees to contact the ethics code in a very, I don't want to say mundane or plain way, but help them understand that everything we do should be falling underneath that code, right? Like taking data, it just seems like that's just something we do, but it's also, in the ethics code. Now, when we go about identifying these issues in the ethics code to which they correspond with, don't be alarmed. In most cases, no one's going to report you to the BACB, right? I mean, if something bad is happening, obviously deal with that the way that needs to be dealt with. But it is perfectly okay to say, we could be doing this better. And in fact, I would have questions if anybody or any organization couldn't identify things that they could do better. I would want to know what that is. Come see me and let's package that, and then we can sell it and retire. But the case is probably that there's always room for improvement. So this is just being intellectually honest with ourselves. What are those things that we need to improve? And what are the BACB code principles or standards or that we need to, that they align with? It just informs our decision-making further. Next, specify the performance objectives, the second step in behavioral systems analysis. Here, we state the goal of our behavioral systems intervention, just as we would state the goal for any sort of academic or behavioral programming that we would design and implement with a student. And just like that behavioral academic programming that we would design or implement with a student, we would want to make sure that our goals reflect measurable things. Measurable things. Sorry, it's Friday. That's going to be the new one, measurable things. So for example, employee will take data after each instructional trial 100% of the time. So that's a performance objective that we can observe and we can evaluate progress towards. So data collection is very, very important here. We would never design an intervention for a student and not evaluate whether or not it was making behavior change, right? So same with our behavioral systems. We would never use our most precious resource, our time, to develop an intervention to change employee behavior and not measure its outcomes. So we have to have performance objectives so we know, whether or not we're making progress. And you always want to make sure too that you identify whatever those measurement systems could be. And so for here, you could use a per opportunity measure. Each opportunity to take data presents an opportunity to actually do so. So to summarize, analyze the natural contingencies, specify the performance objectives being the first 2 steps of BSA. The third step, design the system. And for here, it can go so many different ways. For those of you who have been around for a while, you're familiar with staff training and performance, personal management. You can totally go off on your own way and make it happen. But for those who are new, or maybe you're a supervisor and you're training people who are new, or maybe just looking for some redundancy, something to double check what it is that you're doing, I want to introduce you to my good friend, the Performance Diagnostic Checklist, Human Services, that is a really good and structured form that one could use to help them identify potential interventions or systems to implement. And I'm going to share some more details about this on the next few slides. And the good news is that this, if you were to Google the Performance Diagnostic Checklist, Human Services, it is freely available online. So it's a tool that can help identify deficits and subsequent interventions in undesirable employee performance. And this was based on the original performance diagnostic checklist that John Austin had developed in 2000. And I don't know if anyone remembers, this is the Handbook of Behavior Analysis, and it was a blue book, and it's one that I think that John and Jim Carr edited when they were on the faculty at the University of Nevada, Reno. It was kind of like one of those like classic texts. And it evaluates performance in 4 core areas: training, task clarification and prompting, resources, materials, and processes, performance consequences, response effort, and response competition. So let me show you what the pages look like. And again, if you can't see it on the slides, just Google the Performance Diagnostic Checklist, Human Services, and you'll be able to find it. So on the first page of the Performance Diagnostic Checklist, Human Services, you have, categories of questions. So the training category will ask, I'm all like looking at it myself. Sorry. I always hate it when someone like throws a slide up on the screen and they're like, sorry, you can't read this. And then here I am doing exactly that. So at least it's self-awareness. Like, does that help mitigate it at all? Maybe not. So anyway, the first question being, has the employee received formal training on the task? If yes, check all the applicable training methods: instruction, demonstration, rehearsal. Second question, can the employee accurately describe the target task and when it should be performed? Yes or no? Then it goes through with additional questions and again goes through other categories. Now, I think the trained or fluent behavior analysts, these are all things that you would just sort of do. But if you're not familiar with this process, you're uncomfortable, you're training other people, or again, you just want to double check your work, measure twice, cut once, it's a good idea, then this provides some really good structure to some questions for some things to think about or consider before you go about designing an intervention. Now on the second page, carries on with additional questions about performance consequences, effort, and competition. So one question here being, is the employee ever directly monitored by a supervisor? If so, indicate the frequency of that monitoring. Hourly, daily, weekly, monthly? Hopefully not monthly in our cases, right? And then what the user does is they score those first 2 pages. And on the third page, it provides you with citations supporting potential interventions based off of how you scored it that you could potentially use. Now, to the credit of the authors here, the PDC is getting some of these citations are a little older, but they're still very, very good. And if anything, you can use those to maybe inform how you might conduct a literature search to find some more updated work. Okay? So that's the thing that is also excellent about this tool is that, I'm an autism researcher. I focus on early intervention stuff. And there's just some work, or a lot of work, that I'm aware of it, but I don't know who or what like the primary or formative papers are. And so something like this just gets me in the right direction so I can work smarter and not harder and be efficient with my time, get the information that I need to develop the appropriate intervention for the employees. So again, the Performance Diagnostic Checklist Human Services is a great tool to help inform system intervention if we're not sure what to do. But you don't have to use it, but you could if you wanted to. I do just want to briefly share some data to support this tool's efficacy. And what this is a study that Dr. Tyra Sellers did with one of her students when she was still on the faculty at Utah State University, where they were working in a school and the instructors were engaging in error correction of very poor levels of fidelity. And so Tyra was like, hey, let's see if we can get the performance diagnostic checklist to figure out what we need to do or what types of interventions to implement here. So on the x-axis, we have sessions, and on the y-axis are the percentage of steps correct. And we just have 4 participants: Lisa, Linda, Carly, and Pamela. And so the takeaway point here is in baseline on the left side, of the graphs, we have moderate to low levels of accuracy. And so with error correction, obviously we want to be, really good, really accurate with how we implement that. And in this middle condition, what they have is what's called a non-indicated intervention. So they implemented an intervention that was not suggested by the performance diagnostic checklist. And it produced like mediocre to no effects. And then they completed the performance diagnostic checklist and then implemented the intervention that was recommended. And you can see that we have high levels, but they have high levels of responding for all 4 participants there. So the takeaway here is like, boom, the performance diagnostic checklist is very helpful in developing or identifying systems to then implement to support, really critical behavior, right? Fidelity of error correction. Super important. So after we analyze, specify, and design, the next step is to implement the system. And here we implement it. And it is also very important for us to think about what could potentially be the barriers that might arise when we're implementing our intervention that could get in the way of what we're trying to do. What are those things that are going to pop up that we're going to need to deal with or be ready for? Just as, when you think about, say you design an intervention for a young child and you're trying to get them to communicate, and you're using maybe the picture exchange communication system. And so you have to have all your cards, you have to have your board, your book. It's got to be with the kid, hopefully, ideally, but you're going to lose materials. That's just the nature. Anyone who's worked with young children know that those cards that end up lost, disappeared. You're driving home and you open up your jacket and there's one just like stuck to you. You don't know how it got there. So, I mean, that's a potential issue that you need to be able to plan for. So you make sure that, when the kid wants to go and ask for something, that you've got all the materials that correspond to what it is that they're motivated to ask for. But what could potentially be the things that we might be concerned about with behavioral systems that we need to plan for? Employee turnover, observer drift, and the behavioral definitions that we're using, competing demands on your time that might be pulling you away, that you then are spending less time on trying to support the employee behavior that you identified was really, really important to support. So we plan for these. We can't plan for everything. We do a good job of anticipating what they might be and how we might overcome them. And so when they happen, that we've already got like a plan in place and we're ready to go. The next step after we implement our intervention immediately begins evaluation. Just as we would never implement it, the picture exchange communication system with a child and not evaluate progress in language communication, we would never implement a behavioral system and not measure it. And we've already stated our performance objectives anyway. So we're already kind of like halfway there, right? So we want to make sure that we have a plan for data collection and data analysis. How long are those things, or how often are those things going to happen? Who's going to be in charge of that? Who's the person responsible? How are we going to display the data? And then again, think about what are going to be the challenges or issues that might arise that might prevent us from engaging in this evaluative process, which is really, really important because we're then going to use the data to make changes. So we have to pay attention to the data. The road to somewhere very, very unpleasant is paved with unanalyzed data. My old advisor, my master's advisor, used to say that all the time. And I think he's totally right. And I see it all the time. People just collecting data, but they're not doing anything with it. So they either really need to get to analyzing, or they should probably stop wasting everyone's time by collecting those data in the first place. So, but anyway, that's another rant for another day. But what might be some issues, some challenges that might arise in this evaluation process? Perhaps there's more pressing issues to discuss at our meetings. So one way to overcome that, we might need to budget time in the agenda to make sure we discuss the system stuff, or maybe we de-identify everything and share it electronically for comment, if that's a better way to do it. Maybe there's other demands on our time that might compete with collecting outcome data and graphing it in order to present. So potential solutions to that, we might delegate that task in advance. Maybe we've got someone who's eager to learn more in one of our supervisees, and we can put them on that and make sure that that gets done through our role as a supervisor. So just kind of, these challenges are going to all have different solutions based on where you're working, what your resources are, whatever those challenges might be. So just share these as examples to get you thinking and to talk about, what I mean by thinking about the things that might come up so you can be ready for them so they don't get in the way of you carrying this all through. So after we've analyzed, specified, designed, implemented, and evaluated, it's almost like I can make like that into like a song, right? It's like a Sesame Street song. We're going to revise. This is the continuous quality improvement component of behavioral systems analysis. Even the best systems, just like your best behavioral interventions that I know that you all have designed, they drift into mediocrity sometimes. Certainly not yours, but mine certainly have, and sometimes very, very quickly. Things change in the environment. We have new leadership, new contingencies, new demands, new students, new clients. It's a Tuesday. I don't know. And you have to make modifications. And so just as there's no such thing as a frictionless machine, there's no such thing as a perfect system. So we're always striving to make sure to tune it up, if you will, to make sure it's still meeting the goals or objectives that we stated. Now, how often should we pay attention to the system? It all kind of depends, I think, on the immediacy or the urgency of the issues that we're dealing with. Now, when I think about COVID in the early days and all the risk mitigation that had to occur, I feel like we were meeting like hourly to change the procedures that we had in place. And so like that just is an example of something. I hope we never go back to that, by the way, but that's an example of something that is, very, very important that I think that we could all sort of relate to, that level of urgency that was happening at that point in time. But there's other things where maybe it's every month, maybe it's every couple months, maybe it's every other quarter. I don't know. But the key is to find the sweet spot where you're attending to it just enough, but not too much. And you have to let the data be your guide. If you go to look at it and you see that things are really kind of falling apart, then that might be an indicator that you might need to up the frequency. But if you go to look at it a few times and everything's fine, then maybe that's an indicator that you can just kind of cut it back a little bit. So you're just sort of adjusting based on what it is that you're observing. So you're using basically your data to inform how often you're going to use the data to revise. Yeah. So again, analyze natural contingencies, specify the performance objectives, design the system, implement the system, evaluate the system, revise until you reach your performance objectives. As dear. So I grew up in Northern Michigan. I'm a Michigan kid at heart. These things are everywhere. And especially now, thank you. I love Jenny too. Especially now, because the area I live, there's a lot of farming. There's a lot of corn. And corn's being harvested. And it's just driving out all the deer out of the fields. And so they just, like, you got to be so careful when you drive. And it's like a sport looking out for deer. And actually, when I was a young kid, like, this is what we would do in Northern Michigan. We would go out shining. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, where you literally just drive around and you shine a bright light into a field and see if you can see deer. That was like a thing. Oh gosh, what you do for fun. All right, so I'm just going to give a little bit of an example of a behavioral system in practice, and this is based off of a paper that I wrote, published with Tom Higbee back in 2012 called Teaching and Maintaining Ethical Behavior in a Professional Organization. And I'm keeping an eye on the time here. So I'm gonna kind of get through this and make sure too that we have time for questions, because I want to make sure that I'm able to answer any questions that you may have. But to walk through this a little bit, I want you all to consider an example of an organization that doesn't have anything in place. There's no systems to support ethical behavior. So this is a school or organization, a clinic, or however you want to think about it, that has no systems that are supporting employee ethical behavior. Negative outcomes of that are poor quality of care, poor consumer protection, amongst other things as well. So what might then be some potential performance objectives that we could state? We could state this following hypothetical goal that the organization should provide training in the content area of ethics and professional behavior on at least a weekly basis. So that's a goal that an organization might set in order to deal with its lack of anything that's resulting in negative outcomes. And again, it's important to note that this is hypothetical. I'm kind of talking about this in the context of a medium or larger organization, but again, it's the analytical process that I'm trying to describe to you to think about that you can then transfer to your setting. Because again, you're the expert on what it is that you do. So what might be a potential intervention to make sure that we're delivering ethics training on a weekly basis? So this system that I've designed works in a few ways, where there's an ethics coordinator, so a person who's in charge of overseeing the delivery of ethics training and supervision at the individual and group level. So an ethics coordinator, you could think about as the designated point person who is the expert on ethics in the organization. They're responsible for developing the training materials. They're responsible for revising the training materials. And perhaps they go out and attend workshops, presentations that are advanced in the area of ethics, that they can then take that information back and disseminate that to your organization. And I like to think about this as you might work in a school where maybe there's somebody who's really, really good with challenging behavior, and they're the go-to person. Or maybe you work with somebody who is really, really good with their social skills interventions, and they're the go-to person or resource. And I'm trying to get us to think about this ethics coordinator in that same way. So it could be a formal role, which I know some larger organizations have done, or it could just be like, hey, Matt, you're the ethics coordinator person now, and we're going to release some of your time to be able to help you with that. Good. So it all depends, again, what the resources are. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about a lot of this in detail, but I think about the ethics coordinator too, of being someone who has maybe a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of some of the policies or laws that need to be followed, because that's going to inform some of the decision-making and training that goes on. And I think about, let's say, how we might transmit electronic data, and how we might be working across multiple jurisdictions, and if there's mandated reporting laws in the event that there are cases of abuse or neglect. An ethics coordinator could be knowledgeable about those components to be able to inform us how to act in certain situations. Now, an ethics coordinator too would be responsible for overseeing the development of a structured individual supervision meeting system, where in those meetings, ethics is always a point of conversation. So just as we would talk about, how we're doing with our skill acquisition or academic behavior management programs, we're asking our supervisees to discuss ethics with us as well. And we can shape their behavior based on the verbal reports. It's not the best thing to do, but it's a way to at least have a conversation and try to get people to be open and honest and engaging with us. The last thing we want is for our employees to not share stuff with us. I don't know about you, but I don't like surprises. I mean, I like the good kind. I don't like the bad kind. So by establishing an open line of communication and trust, then we can provide opportunities for feedback when they do something that's great. I really liked how you told me that you responded to that parent. Or, next time that they offer you 2 front row seats to, that soccer game, you should probably kindly decline. So just to kind of give a couple examples. Now, another thing that can happen is that I would encourage you to think about, or at least in this case, what we've designed is that an organization documents the ethical issues that come up over the course of practice, because different settings are going to have just unique things that happen. And you document, you de-identify, and then you can use that as training materials for new people that you onboard. Because again, for those of you who have been around for a while, you know that sometimes the same themes of issues pop up and up again. So you can use that archive as training material for new employees, or perhaps as a refresher for people who have been around for a while. Group supervision would also be a very important component too of a organization who's looking to implement or provide ethics training frequently. So getting the group or larger group or the whole group together, multiple benefits, opportunities for observational learning, peer feedback, modeling and rehearsing positive discussion, developing empathy. It's a good thing, right? We can never have too much of that these days. You need empathy. Also provides opportunity to discuss complex issues as a group. And maybe the ethics coordinator could be there to talk about things that people might have questions about in an individual supervision meeting that they can then bring to the entire group, talk about it with everybody, so everybody can benefit from that rich discussion. So again, analyze, specify, design. Fourth step being implement. If you were to implement something like this, what might be some potential barriers that you might encounter? Perhaps you have changes in leadership that might affect support for the ethics coordinator position. Maybe the role or the demands of the ethics coordinator might drift. There are other things that need to happen. We need you, ethics coordinator, to do social skills thing. And it might also be difficult to prioritize ethics training given the other needs. Maybe the organization is growing. Maybe it's pivoting into a new sector. You just think about it. I hate to think about it in a business sense. I'm just trying to use words that make sense to everybody. So that might take away time. And so again, we want to think about then how we're going to overcome those issues and not let those other contingencies that are going to pop up get in the way of what we're trying to do. How could we evaluate something like this? We could always administer periodic tests that contain scenarios with ethical dilemmas, maybe from the archive that we've developed and shared. Monitor complaints. Maybe we monitor the frequency in which we're providing the training, because that being the goal, one of the initial goals of the intervention. Number of training materials that we've developed, when they're revised, how they're revised, quality revisions. And the reviewers of the paper told me we could always directly observe our employees, but I don't know about you all, but they always do so well when I'm watching them. So even though supervision is good and it's ideal, we can't be everywhere at once. So I hate it when people do this, but I'm going to do it myself because I'm about ready to end. And I want to just summarize that. I hope that it's been helpful for me to present to you an analytical process to help to identify ways that you can change employee behavior within your organization, in particular ethical behavior. Again, you're the expert at what you do. You're the expert. You know what your community needs. You know what your clients need. You know what your staff needs. And if you don't, you should ask. But instead of me just telling you, how you should meet those needs, I hope that this analytical process empowers you, gives you the tools that you need to be able to make things better than what they already are. And really, it's a behavioral analysis, the 6 steps of BSA, but it's just written in a way that I think that really facilitates quite nicely its personal performance, systems performance, and improvement. So I hope that this at least inspired you to think about this process in a little bit more. And sorry, where was I going? Oh, got some duplicate slides in here. So I will end on here though, but my email is mtb@msu.edu if you ever want to contact me about anything at all. And I'm happy to take some questions now if anybody has any. I'll drop my email in the chat too.
Thank you very much, Matt. I don't know if people can hear me and see me. Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. I have a question myself.
Sure.
So for organizations around the globe that have few resources, so a low staff-client ratio, little funding or no funding for training or for anything other than direct service provision, what would your advice be on how to maintain ethical and professional standards?
I think the as the supervisor or whoever might be kind of responsible for the decision making or allocation of resources, or what little resources might exist, should try to think about what are the primary risks or potential issues that we might be facing. And so let's say you're going into homes, and so like what are like the big things that we need to make sure our staff can respond to? So I think about maybe dangerous home situations, unsafe situations, multiple relationships, being a couple of examples. And so the resources there, the little resources that we do have to allocate to doing what we can to infuse within our trainings or whatever we're doing, attention to those important details. Because I just think about like mitigating like risk, identifying what those major risks are being the first step. And because if we can't neglect things like that, and the quality of care is going to go down, certainly, if we do. So I think just being purposeful and, starting at the things that really matter, being okay that we can't do everything, but, a lot of times there are some sort of pivotal types of, skills that we can establish that lead to sort of more generalized types of change. I'm having a hard way of conceptualizing it right now, but being mindful about that too. I hope that helps. Yeah, because I recognize unlimited resources don't exist, but there's still things that are kind of core. So thinking about like what's pressing, and then even something that's low tech, like checklists, or whatever it be, those are technologies that work really well and been around for a really long time that don't cost a whole lot, that could potentially be put to use, just as an example.
I think your idea of having like a library, internal library of ethical scenarios that have presented in real life, and then using those, as you suggested, in different ways. I think this is an excellent low-tech solution.
Yeah.
But,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Because I think that I love ethics books, but so much of what I read is just like, well, I'm not working in this space. I don't know. And so I think when people see things that they can relate to, like my hope is, and this would be a fun study to see if that would result in, better behavior change than just reading something that might be esoteric.
Sure. Thank you. So I believe there are no more questions from the audience.
No problem.
So thank you very much again for joining us. And now I invite everyone to enjoy a brief break, and we will see each other with Armando's talk in a while.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.